Hello and a very warm welcome. You're watching India's World with your host Kriti Mishra. During his visit to India, UK Minister Lord Tariq Ahmad held talks with External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar covering bilateral ties and global cooperation. UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson will visit India in April to unlock opportunities. His office made an announcement of his India trip as it unveiled the integrated review of its security, defence, development and foreign policy, where it set out a tilt to the Indo-Pacific. India and UK have a number of bilateral dialogue mechanisms in place, covering a wide spectrum of areas, including trade, education, science and technology, and defence. The Indian Diaspora in the UK is one of the largest ethnic communities in the country, with approximately 1.5 million people of Indian origin in the UK, equating to almost 1.8% of Britain's population. And in today's edition of India's World, we'll analyse the India-UK ties. Joining me on the programme, Mr. Jitendranath Mishra, former ambassador, and Professor Swarn Singh, chairperson, Centre for International Politics, Organisation and Disarmament, JNU. Welcome to Sunset TV, both of you. And Ambassador Mishra, coming to you first. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson was forced to cancel his trip to India as a chief guest for the Republic Day celebrations in January, following a surge in COVID-19 cases in the UK. Now, he's expected to travel to India at the end of April, in what would be his first major overseas visit following Brexit. India and the UK are all set to revamp their relationship. Your opening comments, Ambassador.
Thank you very much, Kriti ji, for inviting me for your show. It's a great honor to be here today. The opening remarks are very simple. This is a very important visit because it's coming in the framework of a reset in the bilateral relationship, which comes in the wake of the reset of the priorities of the British towards the Indo-Pacific. Now, you already mentioned the words unlocking opportunities and the tilt. And I would add to that what this paper says, this review says. It talks of India as, I quote, an international actor of growing importance. This is a very measured kind of a statement. It's not too much of hype, growing importance and international. It's not just a regional player, it's an international actor at a global level. And that is coming as a recognition. Consider the fact that the Indian economy is today 7.09% of the world's GDP. And in 2030, it will be about 8% of the world's GDP. At independence, we are devastated. So India is a power of reckoning, even if our per capita GDP is still very low. So this tilt towards the Indo-Pacific, India is a power, is a partner of privilege for the British in this, because India has certain capabilities that it can bring to bear in the Indo-Pacific region. And of course, there is the economic factor and the diaspora. Trade is underwhelming. It's about $16 billion. But according to the figures of the Department of Industrial Promotion and Policy, DIPP figures of India, Britain is consistently the number 6 investor in India, with about $19 billion cumulative investments since 2000 in the last 20 years. So that's very substantial. But there's a lot of hype about India's investments in the UK, but actually we are not in the top 10, according to British figures that were recently released in Parliament. So the relationship is important. And the COVID diplomacy, there is no vaccine nationalism. As you know, Prime Minister Johnson rebutted this suggestion by a questioner the other day that there may be vaccine nationalism because the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, Covishield, being manufactured in India, only 70% of commitments are being supplied to the UK. But that's because of problems of raw materials coming in from the US and other countries, not because of India's lack of capacity. And without these, we can't do that. So we are going to talk about all this. And this is going to be a very important visit in the context of Britain's renewed priorities in the world. After Brexit, the three things that will define British policy. One is the sharpening competition and adversarial relationship between the United States and China. Secondly, the devastating effect of the pandemic. And thirdly, Brexit. So India ticks all the boxes. It fits into British strategy. Now, that's the British point of view. What is the Indian point of view? Let's not forget that as far as political relations are concerned, strategic capabilities are concerned, and economic factors are concerned, Britain still punches, as they say, as the British themselves say, above its weight. It's a P5 country. It's a major world power even today, though it's a declining world power. So Britain will always remain important for India, despite there are some problems which are embedded in the domestic politics of Britain, and I'll come to that later. So it's really looking very good, and this visit is going to lead to a very modern and invigorated relationship.
Absolutely, Ambassador, and thank you so much for setting the tone of this discussion. Of course, we'll get into the specifics one by one. But Professor Singh, as Ambassador was talking about vaccine diplomacy, India and the UK have been collaborating on the COVID-19 vaccine, and they've been successful. What are the prospects for this partnership to grow in the post-pandemic era?
Prime Minister Boris Johnson's visit that was announced on Thursday is going to cause a reset in the relationship for various reasons. One, as you just mentioned, he was supposed to be the chief guest on India's Republic Day celebrations this year, but because of pandemic, that visit had to be cancelled. And even to compensate in that situation so that this is not misunderstood, Boris Johnson had clearly said two things. One, he had invited Prime Minister Modi to the G7 summit meeting, which he will be hosting in London this summer in June. And second, more important, he had then made a promise that he will visit India before the G7 summit. And that is how this visit is taking place now. Second, the integrated review, which was again released last Thursday, which is where the visit was announced, is redefining foreign policy of Britain under Boris Johnson. Post-Brexit, this is a foreign policy which is going to be focused clearly on Indo-Pacific. And the review is clearly underlining the centrality of India in Indo-Pacific. In fact, it goes on to say that at the global level, no problems, there could be no solutions without India, as it says. So India is being located at the global level, and Britain is focusing much more on Indo-Pacific as a region of its interest. Now, if you look at it, what was happening last 5 years, you recall the visit of November 2016 of Theresa May, who had created a certain amount of discomfort even when she was Interior Secretary because of her comments on immigration, treating Indian students as immigrants, and that had created a little discomfort, and her visit had not gone very well here. And Britain was seen as no longer the bridge for India to engage with the European Union, but as you would recall, the Finance Minister, then Industry and Commerce Minister Nirmala Sitharaman had said, Britain no longer takes us as an old friend. During that visit, it was said. So with that backdrop of a visit that was 4.5 years ago, which had not gone very well, now this effort to redefine India's centricity of Britain's foreign policy is clearly understood for very quickly two reasons. One, for the immediate, Britain would need enormous cooperation working together with India because of pandemic and supply of vaccines. Serum Institute of India has already promised about 10 million, 5 million are already sent to Britain. Second, more important, is economic resilience.
Right.
India is the largest investor in Britain, largest employer among foreign nations. India is a major trading partner. India has the world's largest expanding English-speaking middle class. So trade and economic relationship with India is going to really be providing certain amount of boost to British economy to go up. So it is in interest of Britain today. Of course, it is also in interest of India, which is being projected by Britain at a global scale now. So we are assuming that the visit is going to really reset and redefine the bilateral relationship and put India at a global level. And India would be really helping Britain in dealing with both the pandemic crisis. Britain, as you see, after Italy and Spain had emerged the worst affected country in Britain, in Europe. But today it is the best in terms of vaccine rates. Half of the adult population is vaccinated. So thanks to Indian cooperation with Britain. So it's a mutually beneficial relationship, and I think which is going to reset that tone of bilateral equations and how two nations will work together at various global issues, including climate change, for example.
All right, sir. So it is all about resetting and redefining the bilateral ties. But you also talked about the G7 summit. Let me take that to Ambassador. Ambassador Mishra, British Prime Minister's visit to India is set to be followed by Prime Minister Modi's visit to the UK in June for the G7 summit, where India is one of the guest countries invited by the host nation, Britain. What are the expectations there, sir?
Well, the expectations have to be good because India has been invited to G7 summits consistently over the last 3 or 4, 5 years, perhaps. And the last one was supposed to be held by President Trump in 2020, and that could not be held because of the pandemic. So this is a continuing process. Now, the interesting thing is the G7 leading to the so-called D10, the democracies 10, with the 3 other countries that are being invited, India plus 2 others. Now, my sense is that is the D10 going to work as a concert of democracies evangelically spreading the democratic message throughout the world and calling out countries, perhaps China, is that in mind? I don't know. But calling out countries that are not democratic. And certainly China qualifies among those countries. But the question here is it a very good idea to push it beyond a point? Because if you want to build a coalition vis-a-vis China, a broader coalition, there are many countries that are capable and willing, such as the Gulf kingdoms, the monarchies. They are not democracies, they are monarchies. So do we want to put them off by talking a lot about democracy and not talking about the broader coalition to balance the rise of China and the assertiveness of China? And the review that was just held in the United Kingdom was, the exact language is China facing capabilities and the systemic challenge from China. Now, Britain is explicitly talking about a systemic challenge from China and to build China-facing capabilities. So it's very, very clear. So if you're going to do that, I'm afraid you have to be more pragmatic and you have to look beyond a concert of democracies called the D10. There is a US initiative. We don't know whether that is separate from the British initiative. But of course, the G7 is not something new. So we have to see it in that context. It's very good symbolically. What it leads to, we don't know, because there is a point of view that the G7 is a somewhat declining entity. It's a declining force in global politics, having been taken over by the G20, for example. So we don't know what's going to happen. But Britain has also shown interest, if I may say so, in joining some other multilateral organizations, such as being a dialogue partner of ASEAN and joining the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership. They want to become a member. So they are looking at other options.
All right, sir, since you're talking about China, in that context, let me also talk about the UK integrated review, which was, of course, unveiled, covering security, defense, development, and foreign policy, where it set out a tilt to the Indo-Pacific. Professor Singh, India appears about 15 times in the review document, where it has been located in the context of deeper engagement with the Indo-Pacific. Way ahead for India-UK ties, given China's expansionist designs.
I think China obviously remains the trigger why this entire Indo-Pacific geopolitics has been designed over the last 4 or 5 years. And initially, some doubts were cast about President Joe Biden, normally speaking of Asia-Pacific, but of course now he's fully engaged with Indo-Pacific, and 4 leaders had their summit meeting recently, have set up 3 working groups. Particularly about the pandemic situation, the partnership is being taken forward. New technologies are another area. So Indo-Pacific remains undergirded by the sense of China challenge, as the integrated review that you mentioned says. But if you see, it's becoming much more attractive proposition for several other nations. Germany was first to introduce Indo-Pacific strategy, followed by France, and now Britain is saying that they want to also find a deeper engagement with Indo-Pacific. That is where centrality of India is interesting expression coming from British commentators. Even Canada is today talking of engaging in Indo-Pacific, despite the fact that you remember that after the CFO of Huawei was detained about 3 years ago, there's a constant brinkmanship that Canada has had with China. And their increasing tilt to Indo-Pacific again could have its consequences. So China remains the elephant in the room in that case very clearly. But I like the way Ambassador just explained that you cannot also ignore China in that sense of engaging China.
Yeah.
So how would potentially Indo-Pacific end up engaging China is something that India was attempting for a long time. You would recall the speech of Indian Prime Minister at Shangri-La Dialogue of June 2018, where we had said that India wouldn't like to see Indo-Pacific becoming either exclusive club or militarized. And after that, India was constantly engaging Beijing, even in our annual maritime dialogue, to have Indo-Pacific discussion with China. And China was also showing some interest in engaging Indo-Pacific. So I think this G7 focus on 10 democracies and D10, etc., is simply to find more traction, find more visibility for G7, which is very clearly being replaced by G20. So in that sense, there is a Quad at center of it. There's a Quad Plus, which is 4 countries, which is Australia, Japan, India, and US. Now plus Vietnam, South Korea, and New Zealand become Quad Plus. But now we are also rearing Quad Plus Plus, which is 3 European major powers and Canada, and even Brazil. So that Indo-Pacific is being now increasingly built around the axis of Quad. And Quad is expanding, vertically, horizontally, thematically. So in that case, there is a whole tumultuous transformation that we are noticing of Quad-led Indo-Pacific debate, in which India finds itself perfectly at home, because India always talked of inclusive, expanded, non-militarized Quad. And India, therefore, has become a kind of a major player in how Quad is being designed and how Indo-Pacific is being designed. And this integrated review and deeper engagement of Britain in Indo-Pacific is only reinforcing that reality of India's increasing relevance. Pandemic has increased India's relevance, with now India promising to produce 1 billion doses only for Indo-Pacific countries, supported, of course, by innovation and finance of United States and Japan, and materials from Australia, for example. So India suddenly had added leverages, added comfort in leading, in sort of playing a leading role in how Indo-Pacific is viewed in coming times. And this integrated view of Britain, this reset of British policy to Indo-Pacific, is actually a reinforcement of India's significance.
All right, let me take that to Ambassador Mishra. Ambassador Mishra, as Professor Singh says, that Quad-led Indo-Pacific discourse, is it reshaping the new world order, sir?
Oh, yes, it is to a considerable extent. I liked what he said, that it should be a non-militarized Quad. Exactly, that's the point, and that's what India wants. We want an inclusive Indo-Pacific. It can't be an Indo-Pacific for China. It cannot be an Asian sanctuary for China. India will never accept it, nor will others. It has to be an Asian sanctuary for all Asians. So therefore, Quad is going to be pivotal. And our emphasis is not on security. Our emphasis is on a much more inclusive agenda. And we are happy that it's leading to that, because we have the vaccine initiative, the Quad initiative, the American investment in the vaccine production in India for the American vaccines that are now in India, will be manufactured. The Johnson & Johnson and I think Novavax, these 2 vaccines. Now, the problem here is, of course, that there are critical raw materials, as I mentioned earlier, which are of American origin. How do you reconcile this with America first? Now, President Biden also believes in America first, at least with regard to American lives and American health in this era of the pandemic. So if you're going to keep your critical raw materials within the United States for manufacturing within your country for your population, because you want to vaccinate your people first, then what happens to the investment in India? And that's the problem that the Serum Institute of India has faced, precisely because there are no critical raw materials. So we cannot meet our commitments because these are coming from outside India. So these are the great challenges. But I'm very happy to note that we are going beyond pure security cooperation. Quad has been hyped too much as a security forum. There is no need to scare China. What is the need to do that? Potentially, China could also to look into it in a friendly, cooperative, genuinely cooperative way. We can never shut the doors on anybody, potentially, in the long term. What about Russia? India would be very much interested in Russia becoming a part of the Quad in some way, but the Russians are being quite coy about it right now. And they are doing exercises with China, Pakistan, Iran, and others, but not with Quad. So Quad will be central, but Quad will not be the only force. And the ASEAN has been fundamentally ambivalent, at least in the public domain. I didn't see any support coming from ASEAN for Quad. In fact, they are trying to balance Quad with their own interests, economic interests with China. And what happens within Quad? Will Japan come to India's help if there is a continental threat again emerging in Ladakh or in Arunachal Pradesh, God forbid, from China? No. We have an agreement with Japan, but that's just a piece of paper. We don't need agreements to cooperate. We had the 4 foundational agreements with the United States. But are they giving us critical technologies? Not yet. Russia has given us critical technologies in the realm of defense. So we have to be very realistic about these things. Let's not hype it up too much.
Absolutely, and we'll have to wait and watch and see how it shapes up. But coming back to the document, the review document again, Professor Singh, the document also said that trade between the UK and the India more than doubled between 2007 and 2019, and investment relationship supports over 500,000 jobs in each other's economies, and the UK is India's second biggest research partner as well. What are the non-trade and trade barriers that India and UK are seeking to address through the enhanced trade partnership?
I think you're right. Lately, if you notice the visits that British prime ministers have had to India, they have had large number of business delegations coming with them. So trade and investment has become very integral part of bilateral relations and how to take it forward, particularly investments. You mentioned how a single company like Tata's are having, something like 650,000 employment opportunities in Britain for people of, people who are living in Britain. Many of them could be of Indian origin people. So in total, about 100,000, I think, jobs are created regularly, annually by Indian initiatives. And of course, we also understand that between these two nations, there is a whole enormous network of education sector. And that, I think, needs a particular attention, because education itself is a major earner of foreign exchange for Britain. And that sector has really seen a downtrend. The immigration policies of Theresa May had led to reduction of Indian students going to Britain for some years as much as by half. So in that sense, that could be one sector where we could see increasing sort of resolving of non-tariff barriers, of whether students should be included in as immigrants to Britain, because they should not be treated as immigrants to Britain. And Boris Johnson had promised as earlier foreign minister when he was, that he will get it rectified. That hasn't happened so far. So some of those issues which are integral connections of India and Britain can perhaps find certain amount of facilitation between these two nations. And the political level, bonhomie and spirit, I think, is something that is going to be reinforcing that trust, which was briefly, sort of missing in some of these earlier interactions, which would see the trade and investments going up, both ways in that sense. There's a famous saying by a sociology professor, Anthony Giddens, at some stage used to talk about reverse colonialism, where India was going to, sort of really, dominate in British economy over a period of time. But I think it's going to be increasingly bilateral is how it is being evolved. And I think in that sense, trade and investment will be a major area. But now when it comes to pandemic, you see, that is a great advantage India has of supplying, a vaccine to Britain and partnering with Britain. For example, AstraZeneca is a great global partnership between Serum Institute of India. And Serum Institute of India, as you know, is giving more than 50% of vaccines under WHO COVAX program. So India's stature at the global level as a production hub for medicines, and particularly now for vaccines, and the innovation of Oxford University AstraZeneca. So there are new partnerships in economic cooperation which are being built, and then there are traditional areas which we need to facilitate, particularly non-tariff barriers, etc., etc. And I think this will be a primary focus during the visit of Prime Minister Johnson now next month to New Delhi.
All right, point well taken. Ambassador, as both nations get ready to hammer out an early harvest trade deal, which are the sectors in focus for UK businesses? And what does an Indian business stand to gain if it were to invest in Britain today?
Well, for the UK, it will be high-end products. It will be manufacturers. It will be technology. They would dearly like to sell us defense platforms, for example, but they are not there yet. They haven't been able to do anything major in that respect because there are technological issues. And there is a certain amount of coyness. Honestly, I'd be realistic on the part of the UK because strategically, they are always saying, oh, well, it's India first, but it's also Pakistan. You know, that kind of philosophy, that kind of attitude informs US policy. Afghanistan, the Americans, I'm digressing a little bit, but I'm doing that only to say that we have to be realistic about the limitations, even of the economic relationship and the early harvest proposals. We are talking about a free trade agreement. It's not going to happen in the near future because there are structural problems in the relationship, in the trade relationship. Right. The UK does not have the kinds of things and technologies that India requires. France has it to a considerable extent. In the military realm, of course, France, Israel, and of course the United States, and of course Russia have it. And but with regard to technology, what technology has the UK shared in the last 30 or 40 years? Virtually nothing, as far as defense platforms are concerned. They have only sold platforms to India. So the early harvest proposals will be early harvest, and how early, I'm not sure about. So that's what it is. And
all right, Ambassador. Yes, sir.
Yes.
I'm completely running out of time, and as our panelists mentioned, that it is all about resetting and revamping the bilateral ties. On that note, thank you so much for joining us. So India and the United Kingdom share modern partnership bound by strong historical ties. That's all we had for you in this edition of India as well. Thanks for watching and stay tuned.